What's going on, everybody? Kalipis Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my first impressions of the Samsung Galaxy A15 5G. Now, as always, if you end up wanting to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where we'll be linking to several other videos about it as I make them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. Now, before we actually get into the phone itself, let's take a quick look at what comes in the box. Now, in the box, we got this charger, which I already took out. I guess I shouldn't really call it a charger. It's really just a double-sided USB-C cable. And in case you're wondering, this phone does not come with a wall adapter. So if you don't have one already, which at this point in 2024, I feel like is pretty unlikely, but just in case you are expecting one, keep in mind, you will have to use your own. Now, in the box here, it's pretty simple, but essentially, inside this little packet thing, we basically have the USB-C cable, which again, I already took out, and a quick start guide as well, so as you can see right here. And last but not least, we got the SIM card removal tool. So yeah, in this day and age, I know some phones like maybe Blue, for example, those devices tend to have a lot of random extras in them, but when it comes to phones like Samsung's and Apple phones and stuff like that, with these manufacturers, we're not really getting a ton in the box, but I feel like, again, in this day and age, this is really not that surprising. But anyway, moving on to the phone itself, with the Samsung Galaxy A15 5G, we are getting a really nice display here. With this phone, we're getting a decently large 6.5-inch 90Hz Super AMOLED display. I don't remember off the top of my head if the A14 5G had a Super AMOLED too. I'm pretty sure it did, but regardless, for a $200 phone, or depending on your carrier and what deal you get, you could even get this phone for a lot less. So in general, for a phone this affordable, getting a Super AMOLED is definitely a nice thing. We're also getting a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 396, and a 19.5 by 9 aspect ratio. So yeah, in general, definitely a great display here, and I really have no complaints. The only thing really preventing it from looking super premium is really not related to the display itself, but as I'm sure you can see, the bezels are on the thicker side, and we are also getting a water drop notch for the selfie camera, which at this point in 2024, this look is pretty outdated, so overall, if you do want a phone that as a whole looks a bit more premium, then you might be disappointed here, but when it comes to just the display itself, you really won't go wrong with this. With a Super AMOLED compared to something like an IPS LCD, displays like this tend to be a bit brighter, the colors are a bit more vibrant, and the viewing angles are really good too. So if you're maybe outside in the sun, for example, with a display like this, the screen will be pretty easy to see. And of course, with a 1080p resolution, things are nice and sharp. And at 6.5 inches, despite maybe not being the largest display you can get, I do think it is a pretty good size here. So in general, if you're looking for a phone that's on the affordable side, but you still want a really nice display for consuming content, the A15 5G will be a great choice for you. Now for storage, with the Samsung Galaxy A15 5G, we're getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion too, so finally this phone is actually getting a good amount of storage. I know the A14 and A13 before it, of the 5G versions at least, those phones had 64, which was at least decent, but at this point in 2024, I feel like 64 is really not that impressive anymore. So seeing the A15 5G with 128 is definitely a nice thing. Now, that being said though, keep in mind I did get this phone at Best Buy, and it is factory unlocked, so depending on your carrier, the storage might be different. But in general, if you are looking for a phone that has a decent amount of storage, then overall, I do think the storage on this phone will be enough for most people. Now for security features, the A15 5G does have Face Unlock and a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. So pretty standard. The predecessors were basically the exact same, so the A13 5G, A14 5G, they all have pretty much the same setup, and I'll take that a step further and say pretty much every Samsung Galaxy A series phones except the slightly higher end ones like the A54 5G or A55 when it comes out. Aside from those phones, most of them are going to have the fingerprint scanner right here on the power key, which is really not bad. So let's go ahead and try it out. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And then again, like pretty much every Samsung phone, with the A15 5G, we are getting Face Unlock here as well. So if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, with the A15 5G, again, we got this water drop notch for the selfie camera, which is really not my favorite design, but at least the notch isn't really that big, so it is what it is. I mean, it's a cheap Android phone, so you can really only expect so much. And I imagine with a phone like this, most people are not really going to be that concerned about aesthetics anyway, so it's not really that big a deal. And keep in mind, this camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we get a triple camera setup. with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. So definitely a great camera setup here, and one thing about this phone that is really nice compared to the predecessors before it is that with this phone, again, we are getting an ultra wide camera, whereas with the A14 5G and the A13 5G, even though their 4G counterparts did have ultra wide cameras, the 5G versions didn't. So with the A15 5G, this is really the first phone in this line as far as I'm aware that does have an ultra wide camera, so definitely a nice upgrade here. Now as far as the rest of the camera goes, considering this is a first impressions video, I haven't actually used this camera yet, but in general with a 50 megapixel camera, it's probably going to be pretty similar to the A14 5G, which in and of itself was really not bad at all. So overall, if you're looking for a really affordable phone that has a good camera, but you still don't really need the fanciest thing out there, then I do think the camera we're getting here will be good enough for you. Also keep in mind for video, with the A15 5G we are getting a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K here. Now for the RAM and processor, with the A15 5G, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 6100 Plus processor. Now overall, in my experience so far, which granted isn't really a whole lot considering I just got this phone, the performance has been pretty good, but overall, it's nothing really crazy impressive. So overall, if you're looking for a phone for more basic use, stuff like web browsing, social media, watching the occasional video here and there, and maybe some light mobile gaming, I do think it will get the job done, but if you're expecting something seriously fast, you are going to want to get something a bit higher end. In addition to this, keep in mind, compared to the A14 5G that had the MediaTek Dimensity 700, I feel like the 6100 Plus is really not that much of an upgrade, if really at all. I mean, performance-wise, as you're about to see in a minute, they're pretty much the exact same. So if you do have the A14 5G and you're considering upgrading to the A15 5G, I feel like it might not really be that much of an upgrade. Sure, when it comes to stuff outside the processor, like the camera, again, this phone does have an ultra-wide camera, so if you really want that but you don't want to get a higher-end phone, then in that case, going to the A14 5G to the A15 might be a little bit more justified, but still, I feel like that's probably still not really super worth it. But yeah, in general, when it comes to performance, on one hand, from what I can see so far, the difference is really not that big from the A14 to the A15. But at the same time, if you're really just looking for a decent, affordable 5G phone, especially for more basic use, you're still not going to go wrong with this phone. Now, I ran a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of whether or not this phone will be a performance upgrade for you. Because of course, depending on what you're coming from, it may or may not be. I mean, if you're coming from a really low-end device, then chances are this will be a huge upgrade. But on the other hand, if your current phone is something like the Samsung Galaxy A52 5G or something like that, then it might be around the same, if not a bit slower. But overall, again, for what it is, I do think the A15 5G has pretty decent performance, so considering it is more of an entry-level device, I really can't complain too much. For the battery, with the A15 5G, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery that supports 25 watt fast charging. So definitely a great battery here, which considering most Samsung Galaxy A series phones have pretty much the same configuration, I'm really not that surprised, but I did notice the fast charging is a little bit better here from the A14 5G. I believe the A14 5G had 15 watt fast charging, but keep in mind to actually use this fast charging, you will need a charger that's 25 watts or better, so definitely keep that in mind. But yeah, in general, we are getting a really good battery here, so if that is more of a priority for you, then the A15 5G will be a pretty good choice. For the software, the A15 5G does have Android 14, which is great. Always good to get the newest version of Android, and keep in mind, Samsung has also confirmed this phone will get 4 major updates. So with the A15 5G, you can expect to get Android 15, 16, 17, and 18. So definitely nice there, and it also has 5 years of security updates, I believe. So in general, if you are looking for a really affordable phone and getting the latest software is important to you, then you won't go wrong with the A15 5G. Now taking a closer look at the phone itself, in general, despite having slightly thicker bezels and the water drop notch up top, again, I feel like this stuff makes it look a little bit cheaper. Overall, for what it is, the phone is really not bad, and it has this squared off design that Samsung has been using for quite a while now. When it comes to the materials, as you might expect, the phone is made entirely of plastic, except the display of course. So this means it's not going to feel premium at all. But in general, despite this, it still feels of decent quality, so it's not like the phone is going to fall apart while while you're using it through daily wear and tear. Just keep in mind it doesn't have a ton of weight to it, and again, it doesn't really feel super nice or anything. And since it is made entirely of plastic, when it comes to durability, compared to something that has like an aluminum frame and a glass back, it's not going to do as well if you happen to drop it, so I do recommend pairing it up with a case. Now on the left side here, we got the slot for the SIM card and the micro SD card. On the bottom, we got a 3.5mm headphone jack, the microphone, USB-C port, and the speaker. And keep in mind, unfortunately, this phone does not have stereo audio, so basically what this means is when you're playing something like music, for example, sound only comes from the main speaker and not the earpiece. So that is a little limiting if you're consuming a lot of content without headphones. But for some people, this might not matter too much. On the right side, we got the power key, which again does double as a fingerprint scanner. Volume down, volume up. On the top, like pretty much every phone, we got the noise canceling microphone. On the back, we got the camera module, flash, and then Samsung branding. Also keep in mind, the Samsung Galaxy A15 5G also does have NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, with this phone you will be able to use that feature no problem. But in conclusion, my overall first impressions of the Samsung Galaxy A15 5G. Now, in general, by itself, I do think this is a pretty good phone. I mean, it has a really nice display, plenty of storage, decent performance, a nice camera, a really good battery, features like NFC, and great software support. But whether or not it's actually a good choice for you really depends on what you're coming from. On one hand, if you're coming from, again, a super low-end device, and you really need more of a basic phone for basic activities, and maybe you want 5G connectivity and a better display or something like that, in that case, the A15 5G will be a really good choice. And again, by itself, for what it is, I mean, as of right now, this is a $200 phone. After tax, I got it at Best Buy for like $220 something, and keep in mind again, this is factory unlocked, so no carrier deals or anything like that. So yeah, for what it is, for such an affordable phone, I do think it gives us a lot of value. But if you already have something like the Samsung Galaxy A14 5G, for example, I feel like between that phone and this phone, there's not really a huge difference, so in that case, it might not be quite as worth it. But this concludes my first impressions video for the Samsung Galaxy A15 5G. Again, if you want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.